Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. This book tells in detail about the Muslim conquest of Spain under the Umayyad Caliphate from 711 AD to 718 AD. The conquest is also known as the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula or the Umayyad conquest of the Visigothic kingdom. This conquest destroyed the Visigothic kingdom and established the Umayyad wilaya of Al-Andalus. It also resulted in the expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate and the Muslim rule into Europe. Start of Chapter 9. The Fall of Toledo. Having sent off the two columns for Cordoba and the south, Tarik began his march from Akija. It was the beginning of Zulqa'd 92 Hijri, third or fourth week of August 711. His objective was Toledo, 250 miles to the north, the capital of the Visigothic kingdom of Spain. The exact strength of the army which marched with him is not known, but allowing for the casualties suffered at Akija and the detachment of forces under Mughis al-Rumi and Zad bin Qasidi, it probably numbered around 10,000, all mounted. Tarik marched eastwards, using minor roads for his movement and avoiding the main road to Cordoba. When he got to Jain, he swung north, crossing the Guadalquivir at Manzibar, and then took the main road to Toledo. Some sources suggest that he made a detour from the right via the present Villanueva de la Fuente, but the point is not important. He arrived at Toledo without meeting opposition on the way. It is interesting to study the principle of security in the advance involving a deep and narrow penetration as effected by Tarik. A cautious general would worry about a threat to his flanks and rear from enemy forces bypassed in the advance. Not securing the ground along the line of advance undoubtedly poses a risk as the advance goes deeper. However, the threat is not from ground left unswept, but from an enemy who could use that ground. If there is no enemy force with the will or capability to use that ground, there is no threat. In this situation, the only known hostile forces were in Cordoba and the south of Spain, and for these forces Tarik had earmarked suitable detachments. There was no one else who could pose a serious problem to the Muslims as they advanced into the heart of Spain. By himself creating a threat to the enemy's base, he made it impossible for the enemy to create a threat to his communications. Moreover, the fact that his army was a mobile, live-off-the-land army and did not depend on lines of communication facilitated Tarik's aim of securing a quick and decisive victory over the center of the enemy's political and military power. So Tarik marched to Toledo, which trembled at the approach of the Muslim conqueror. The time of his arrival has not been recorded by historians, but considering the distance and the absence of opposition on the way, his mounted force could not have spent more than 2 or 3 weeks on the journey. His arrival at the Visigothic capital would thus be in about the middle of Zulqa'd, or soon after, before the middle of September. Toledo was once the Toletum of the Romans, a small fortified town captured by them in 193 BC. It was occupied by the Gothic king Theodis in the middle of the 6th century and had been ever since the capital of the Visigothic kingdom of Spain. Located almost exactly in the center of the peninsula, it was geographically the right place for the capital. It was also a most defensible town. Sitting on a rugged promontory of granite, it was protected on the 3 sides by the deep gorge of the fast-flowing river Tagus. The river approached the town at its northeastern edge, flowed down its eastern side, turned round along the south and went up the western side of the town, before flowing away in a westerly direction. Toledo was cradled by a curve of the Tagus, with a range of green wooded hills rising on the southern side of the curve. The gorge had precipitous sides 500 feet high, which, though not impossible to climb, made an attack very difficult, with the result that the capital could be attacked only from the north. The town and the citadel, which stood on a high rock overlooking the eastern arm of the gorge, should have given the defenders confidence, but did not. Toledo was in no position to dispute with the Muslim conqueror, for reasons more psychological than otherwise. There was no high command to direct operations in the Spanish kingdom. What amounted to a high command had perished on the banks of the Barbate. All that remained of the command structure was individual generals, some braver than others, who commanded their own separate forces, neither aiding their fellow Goths nor being aided by them, continuing to resist and holding out in castles because it was their duty to do so. There was no one in charge, no political head, no supreme commander or staff. The Senate was still there but would need time to select another man as king, who would then create a team to run affairs of war and peace. In the matter of command and direction of war, there was at the moment a vacuum, and this contributed to the failure of resolve on the part of the Christian population of Toledo to defend their city. On the other hand, Tarik's fame had preceded him. The hard blows given by him to the Gothic armies and his unbroken chain of victories had led to frightening reports about the invincibility of the Muslims. The terrified remnants of the Gothic forces which had broken under Muslim attacks grossly exaggerated, as vanquished soldiers are apt to do, the valor of the Muslims, the rapidity of their movements, and the cunning of their plans. The flower of the Gothic army either lay dead on the battlefields of the Barbate and Akija, or wandered aimlessly as fugitives. Those who had taken refuge at Toledo now fled to the northern provinces. Even the metropolitan of Toledo, an eminent clergyman named Cinderado, saw wisdom in flight and did not stop till he had got to Rome, leaving his followers to fend for themselves. Only a handful of Gothic warriors remained in Toledo, along with a subject populace which had neither a taste for war nor the qualification for waging it. Tarik arrived to find the gates of Toledo closed against him. Since the only access to the town was from the north, he crossed the Tagus and went into camp on the northern side of the town. He moved detachments up close to the wall. The inhabitants, with few munitions of war and no hope of succor from outside, took only a few days to realize the futility of resistance. They asked for terms and were happily surprised to see how generously they were to be treated by the conquerors. According to the terms imposed by Tarik, the inhabitants would give up their weapons and horses. Those who wished to depart were free to do so, though without their possessions, while those who elected to stay were assured the security of all they possessed. They were free to exercise their religious faith and use their churches as before, even to administer themselves under their own laws. Nothing would be taken from them. There would be no pillage, no captivity, no slavery. All they had to do in return was to remain peaceful and law-abiding, and to pay the jizya, a light poll tax from which old men, women, and children were exempt. The gates of Toledo were thrown open and the Muslims went in. There was no trouble. The army took up its quarters in the town. Tarik and his guard occupied the royal palace in the citadel overlooking the Tagus, later known as the Alcazar. This was the greatest prize in Spain. The victory, though bloodless, was far-reaching in its consequences. Never again would the Visigoths rise in strength against the invaders. But Tarik was not content with what he had achieved. It was still September. There was plenty of good weather left for campaigning. And there were these persistent reports of Goths fleeing from the capital, collecting in large fortified towns beyond the mountains. Tarik could not rest while there were more laurels to be won in the Holy War. He spent some time organizing the administration of the conquered city, again with the Jews in charge of it. He left a small garrison of soldiers to keep control over the city, and he ordered the bulk of his army to prepare to march out for another campaign. There is much dispute about what Tarik did after Toledo, where he went, how far he went. There are those who say that he traversed the land of Rome, actually Galicia, where he encountered a people who were like savages and beasts. Those who say that he penetrated Leon and Castile and took Gijon on the Cantabrian coast, while others maintain that these deeper objectives were taken later, after Musa had joined up with Tarik. These last sources are right, for the year was too far advanced for deep objectives. There are those who ascribe to Tarik a limited penetration beyond the Guadarrama mountains, while yet others place the limit of his penetration short of the range. Here too, the latter version is more probable, though he may have gone deeper than just the line of the Guadarramas. It is this last version of a limited penetration which is described in this chapter. While the possibility of error is acknowledged, the expedition was launched while the year 92 Hijri had not yet run its course, and Tarik was back in Toledo in early 93 Hijri, which began on October 19, 711. He may have been gone for a month or two, but not more, because by mid-November, the northern part of Spain suffers winter conditions which would not be conducive to operations, not by Arabs and Berbers. The march was begun in early October, middle of Zulhaj. It was directed at Wadiul Hajara, Valley of Stones, which is the name by which the Arabs called the ancient Roman town of Compluto, and which has since been Spanishized into Guadalajara. They crossed the low hills which extend south of Alcalá de Henares, and went through a pass somewhere in these hills which came to be known as Faj Tarik, that is, Pass of Tarik. Somewhere in this area Tarik captured the town of Maya or Umayyad, where Gothic soldiers had taken refuge, but which was captured without much trouble. He also took the city of Maida, meaning table, which was probably the present Alameda, south of Alcalá de Henares, where he found the fabulous table of Solomon, of which a detailed description is given in a later chapter. The region of Alcalá de Henares and Guadalajara appear to be the limit of Tarik's advance to the north. He stopped not only because winter was about to set in, but also because his soldiers begged him to stop. The men were exhausted. They had been on the move for 6 months with almost no respite. Driven by their indefatigable commander, they were tired of marching and fighting. Their bodies were dried up, they said to Tarik. Are you not content with all the victories which Allah has bestowed upon you? Tarik laughed as he replied, By Allah, if you would stick by me, I would go on until I stood at the gates of Rome and Constantinople, and would conquer them with Allah's help. Then you really would be tired. Tarik realized that he had pushed his men to the limits of human endurance. Moreover, the cold winter of northern Spain was setting in. So he returned to Toledo, getting back to the capital in the early weeks of 93 Hijri, October or November 711. Tarik and his men settled down in Toledo to await further orders from their commander-in-chief. Soon after their return, they were joined by the column which Tarik had sent out from Akija under Zaid bin Qasidi to subdue the south of Spain. Tarik's campaign was over. Tarik conquered Spain, virtually. Others after him would also claim that honor, but it was Tarik who broke the back of the Gothic power in two fierce battles. All that remained after that was isolated and uncoordinated resistance, which would be overcome, with some exceptions in what was little more than mopping up operations. He had taken the capital and center of political and military power of the Visigothic kingdom, while Maurice al-Rumi, working under his orders and according to his plan, had conquered Cordoba, the second most important seat of power in Spain. Toledo was the high water mark of Tarik's campaign. Tarik had established his base on the south coast of Spain from which sprang the Muslim conquest, and which prepared the ground for the first great battle against the Goths. In what, in terms of movement of those days, amounted to a lightning campaign, Tarik advanced from the banks of the Barbate to Toledo, covering a distance of 500 miles in 3 months, during which he not only fought and won two bloody battles at the Barbate and the Kija, but also overcame sundry opposition. It was his leadership, his inexhaustible energy, his fierce zeal, his tactical skill, and his dedication to the cause of the Holy War, undeterred by the hostility of an ungrateful superior, which made this glowing success possible. It was Tarik who could rightly claim to the conqueror of Spain his place assured as one of the glorious figures of Muslim history, who conquered another land to add to the brotherhood of Islam. But Tarik's campaign was over. Henceforth, operations in Spain would be directed and coordinated by Musa bin Nusayr. Tarik had done his job. He settled down at Toledo for the winter and for a well-earned rest. An enormous amount of booty was taken in the campaign, especially at Toledo, of which 4/5 were distributed among the Muslim warriors, and 1/5, according to Quranic law, put aside for Damascus as the share of the state. Historians have given mind-boggling accounts of the spoils of war, which are probably somewhat exaggerated. We are told that in Toledo the Muslims collected a vast amount of wealth in gold and silver, in goods beyond counting, in treasure which left them spellbound. There were 25 crowns of gold adorned with pearls and precious stones, one belonging to each of the Gothic kings who had reigned in Spain. There were 1,000 swords studded with rubies and pearls. There were several vessels filled with rubies, emeralds, topazes, and pearls. There were utensils of gold and silver which defy description. There was a huge carpet depicting a garden scene with branches of gold and chains of pearls and rubies and topaz. And there was the table of Solomon. Tarik's greatest achievement, however, was not the spoils but the conquest itself, and this would not have been possible without his 12,000 dauntless warriors. His army was mainly a Berber army with a handful of Arabs and Negroes. They fought not as men of a certain race or tribe, but as Muslims, without distinction of race or color. The Berbers who comprised the detachment of Maurice thought of him not as an Arab, distinct from themselves, but as a Muslim, just like themselves. Since it was the Berbers who conquered Spain and laid the foundations upon which the history of 800 years of Muslim Spain was built, it would be of interest to the reader to know something about them. Who were the Berbers? A good deal of research has been carried out on the Berbers by scholars and historians. Ibn Khaldun wrote many chapters on their origin, their tribal structure, their political and social organization, their history, religion, etc. Later scholars of the West have spent years laboring on this research. The picture of the Berber background and origin, however, is still not very clear, and there is still much that is vague and possibly incorrect in our knowledge of this people. The Berbers are not one race or one group of people. They comprise several groups which entered the mainstream of North African life, coming from many directions and interacting one upon another. They evolved into a group with more or less similar racial and cultural characteristics. The group eventually became the largest one inhabiting the northern zone of Africa from western Egypt to the Atlantic, populating what are now the countries of Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania. Originally, it appears, the largest group which came to comprise the Berber nation consisted of oceanic peoples. They came from Crete, Cyprus, or Asia Minor, perhaps even from parts of ancient Greece. They came to Palestine as a maritime nation and invaded Canaan in about the 12th century BC. They were the Philistines of the Bible. Eventually, the conflict between them and the Semites culminated in a battle between King David and Goliath, the gigantic leader of the Philistines. Goliath was slain in single combat by David, and as a result of their defeat, the Philistines were forced to move out of the land. They came to Egypt, but their presence was not welcome to the Copts, who drove them out of the country. They went to Barca, and here they split into tribes and clans, some settling down in Libya and others moving farther into the Maghreb until they reached the shores of the Atlantic. Before they got to North Africa, however, there were European peoples already living in the region who fused with and became one with the newcomers. These peoples, taken as a whole, were the ancestors of the Berbers as we know them. In later centuries, the Berbers fought the Romans, won some battles tactically but lost most wars strategically. At last they submitted to Roman rule. It came to be understood that the coastal cities and the valleys would belong to the Romans, the mountains and deserts to the Berbers. The Berbers are of Eurasian stock. They have Caucasoid features with brown pigmentation, often fair and even blonde, especially in the mountains of the Maghreb. At one time they spoke a Hamitic language, which has come down to the present-day Berber language in its various dialects, spoken from the Suwa oasis in western Egypt to the Atlantic Ocean, and from the river Niger to the Mediterranean Sea. Some Berber tribes are perhaps not Berber at all, example the Kutama, the Sinhaja. They followed whoever came in strength and conquered their land. They joined the conquerors in plundering others. In time, they even plundered their earlier masters by joining new conquerors who came with sufficient power to take over the land. Their fortunes shifted with the shift in fortune of their conquerors and the foreign rulers of North Africa. In religion, they varied. Many tribes were Jewish as a result of influences coming down from the days of Goliath. Many tribes adopted Christianity because of their contact with the Romans. Many were sun worshippers. Some worshipped idols, while yet others were pagans. They were inconsistent and wore their religion lightly, like clothes to be discarded when no longer needed. With the first coming of Islam to North Africa, they accepted the new faith also, then reverted to whatever they had followed before. They would again become Muslims and again apostatize. They apostatized 12 times in the early Islamic period, and it was not till the time of Musa bin Nusayr that Islam gained a permanent hold on the Berbers' heart. The Muslims, fighting in North Africa, found in the Berbers the fiercest enemies they had encountered in their history. The courage and toughness of the Berbers, their resilience in recovering from one bloody defeat to come back for more, their tenacity in opposing the Muslim advance, faced the Muslims with greater military difficulties than they had experienced in their wars against the Romans and the Persians. The Berbers proved themselves a valiant nation, but in the end they submitted to Islam. Once they had become Muslims and remained Muslim, they rose again as the greatest holy warriors of the time. Their name came from their contact with the Arabs. In Arabic, the word barbar means to mutter, to make a noise which no one understands. There were mainly dialects in the Berber language, and they kept talking and disputing with each other. The Arabs thought that no one did so much barbar as these people. The name stuck, Barbar, or, as now spelled in English, Berber. They were a brave people, warlike and chivalrous with intense tribal feeling. They were loyal to their chiefs, whom they followed unquestioningly in war and peace. They were a fine-looking people with strong, handsome men and strong, beautiful women. They were men of the desert and the mountain, combining the characteristics of both. They were unfailing in their friendship, unforgiving in their enmity. These then were the Berbers, the holy warriors of Islam. They not only conquered Spain for Islam and for the Arab power in Damascus, but would in later centuries even provide 2 dynasties to rule over the peninsula. End of chapter 9.